privilege to be able to come here tonight and to address you guys. It's a wonderful privilege for me. I think when I was younger, I would think you guys were lucky, but tonight I think I'm lucky. So thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I remember when I was about 17 years old, I was at my uncle and aunt's house. They had a tennis court, and I was busy messing around with my tennis racket trying to fix my strings. And my little nephew came to me. He's about 6 years old. His name's Jeandre. And he came to me, and he was the younger cousin of everybody, and so he always felt like he was an adult. So he tried to make a very adult statement as he kind of looked at my racket and what I was busy doing. And he said to me, "What are you doing on earth?" And and I went, "Geez, that's a big question for a 6-year-old." I mean, obviously trying to say, "What on earth are you doing?" But what are you doing on earth? Now that's a good question, right? What are we doing on earth? And a lot of books have been written about it, and as we discussed, the topic for tonight was discovering your purpose and your passion. And you mentioned Rick Warren's book. There's also this business book that James Collins, or as some people know him, Jim Collins, knows him. It's From Good to Great. It's primarily written for companies, but people have used it for individual lives. And basically, one of his premises is the hedgehog. And the hedgehog is, what are you good at, what are you passionate about, and what drives your economic engine. Where those three things overlap, you have a hedgehog, or what they call a sweet spot. But my question tonight is that enough? Is it enough to live a life that's worth living if you just find your passion and your purpose? And the reason why I asked that question is I recently read in the USA Today, and I still read some papers from where we lived in LA, a stat that was actually quite frightening. And the stat was that in 2017, 47,000 people in America, the land of the free and the home of the brave, committed suicide. And very accurate research has shown that for every single person that actually did, there was 280 others that either tried or considered it very seriously. That's over 13 million people that didn't think their lives weren't worth living anymore. And in fact, the one lady who survived it, she was a 10-year survivor, and they interviewed her, and they asked her some questions. And one of the things she said, I didn't want to die. I actually didn't want to die. I just didn't want to live anymore. My life just wasn't worth living anymore. But not only that, the stats also showed, and again, the source was the USA Today, that 72,000 people, that's 14,000 more people than soldiers who died in the Vietnam War, which was started in the 60s and ended in the 70s, died of a drug overdose in America. And you know what? There's the number one killer? Fentanyl. Fentanyl is a painkiller. People are hurting. Life does not feel like it's worth living anymore. Let me pray. Father, I thank you for your grace and your mercy, and that you're slow to anger, you're rich in love. And I pray tonight that you will come by your Spirit, that you'll anoint the words that I speak, Lord, and bring hope and bring life. In Jesus' name. Let me tell you about a night that I woke up when I felt like my life wasn't worth living. It was 2011. It was a cold November night, and I had a nightmare. And as I opened my eyes from this nightmare, I realized things were only getting worse because I had a full-blown panic attack. I don't know if anyone here has had a panic attack. It's not a joke. You literally feel like you're going to die. Pins and needles running down the side of my head. I could hear as my heart was beating in my throat, and I didn't know what was going on. So my best weapon of defense was just deny it, try and fall asleep again. But as I closed my eyes, this nightmare started playing again. And I opened them again, and I was back in the panic attack. And this carried on for about 45 minutes. I was in complete denial. And eventually, I lay on my back with my eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, and thinking to myself, is this what it's like to go insane? And I had to reconcile, why am I feeling this way? I had to start digging into my heart. And I realized, when my mind started clearing, I realized that I had dreams in my 20s and my 30s, and I'd worked my head off to make those dreams come true. I'd been a Christian for all that time. And I mean a committed Christian. This is not a story about some guy who did drugs and came right, or was a serial adulterer or embezzled money. I was faithful, wanting to walk with God. And here I lay in my bed, and I realized not only had those dreams not happened, they couldn't happen anymore. Like a rugby player who has a career-ending injury and realizes it's over. He never is going to play for the Springboks or whatever the case might be. We had run out of money. I hadn't had my breakthrough in America like I thought I would have. We'd tried to have children. That didn't work out. We tried for 10 years. Lots of pregnancies later and nothing. And my reputation was gone. The phone stopped ringing. And I thought to myself, what do I do at 2 o'clock in the morning other than maybe pray? So I got up and I thought, let me go and pray. But as I was walking there, I thought to myself, am I an idiot? What am I going to pray for? I'm going to pray for a breakthrough. I'm going to pray for a job, for money. I've been doing that for 20 years. What a waste of time. But I went anyways, and as my knees hit the ground, I remember thinking to myself, God, this is your fault. And man, I was bitter and I was angry. And to sum it up, I basically said, I did this, and this. You promised this, and this, and this, and this, and this didn't happen. I carried on for about 2 hours, and like a crazed prosecutor, I finally said, I have no evidence that you're my life. If someone looks at me and says, this is a Christian guy, look at him, and they'll go, well, where's the evidence? He's not blessed. He's not living a blessed life. Everything's fallen apart. After 2 hours, eventually I kept quiet, and I thought, okay, do you want to say anything? Nothing. Dead quiet. Waited a couple of minutes. I thought, okay, I feel better. So I went to bed. And as I got into bed, I opened my iPad. And I remember I'm like Happy Feet. You need to distract me to fall asleep. So I was reading something so I could just feel distracted. So I stopped thinking. And as I opened my book randomly on my iPad, the first thing I read was, if God did not spare his own son from the wilderness, whom he loved and whom he was well pleased, why in the world do you think he would spare you from it? I'll be 100% honest with you, that information went straight over my head. I'm like, no, that's interesting. But if you read Deuteronomy 8 verse 2, God speaks to the Israelites and he says this to them. He says, and you shall remember the Lord your God who led you through this wilderness for 40 years to humble you and to show you what was in your heart. I was about to find out because about a week later we were invited to some friend's house and there was a prophetic minister there from Atlanta, Georgia. It wasn't a guy to be messed with, as we noticed when he started praying for a couple of people, saying things about their lives that he would not have known. It was a private gathering of industry people who worked in studios and entertainment and so on. So about 15, 16 of us. And eventually he turned to me and my wife and he looked at us and he started praying for us, and he said to us, God showing me that you guys have been through a really, really tough time. I mean, literally, we'd run out of our money. I'd blown a lot of money on this dream and had nothing to show for it. Nothing. 20 years of hard work and nothing. He said, you've been through a tough time, but I see there's a wall between the two of you. There's a wall in your marriage. Like Satan has been able to devise, the devil's been able to devise a wall between the two of you. And I'm like, what? Don't think bad things, people. What are you saying? And he kept going and he said, God is getting ready to take you into dangerous places, but if the foundation of your marriage is cracked or not strong, you won't make it. You simply won't make it. And then he turned to me and he said, you're the kind of guy that likes to communicate bullet points. You ask the question, if the answer is not offered in 2 seconds, you'll just give the answer. And I see these scenarios play out between you and your wife, and she's talking, and you just keep interrupting her. And you've damaged her heart. And God says, you need to stop that. I look to my side, there's my wife sitting, tears just dripping into her lap. Whoo! When something gets articulated that you blinded to for about 15 years, we married 23 years next month, but at the time we were married about 15 years, out loud, that you haven't seen, and then you see the evidence of what you've done. Oh my word. I mean, I literally felt like, the cops had busted me and they were shining a bright light and said, you the guy who stole the stuff. I had no leg to stand on. And then he said to me, and God has blessed you in your career. You've been successful. God has anointed you. That's what you should be doing as an actor. And I had a 20-year run of success. And then, before 7 on, it was TV commercials, paid for my whole university degree, and then some, just out of making commercials. And then he says, and God opened doors for you, but then the doors started to shut. And he wants you to know that he shut them because your heart is not surrendered and you've not been willing to pay the price. That was shocking information for me to hear. Because, like I said, I'd been a Christian for 20 years. I discovered my purpose and my passion. I knew what I was about. I was doing the Lord's work. And here I'm being told, your heart's not surrendered and you've not been willing to pay the price. It's like God took the movie of my life and he flipped the camera and he showed me the picture from his perspective. Because just the week before, I showed him what the movie looked like to me. And then the guy said, and if you'll submit to God, and if you pursue God in this, between 2012 and 2014, he will restore your voice, and that'll elevate you back up into this industry that you're a part of. And he said, I want you to know that this is not some condemnation word from God, but this is a rebuke because he loves you. I can tell you now, the drive home was quiet. The next day we started chatting and we started talking about all the things that had gone wrong and all the hardships we'd gone through. And we both admitted and realized and said, you know what? Our natural default as people, when you go through a tough time, is to close your heart. Because no more love out means no more hurt in. But also means you lose the intimacy. And we made a commitment that day, after repenting to God and to each other, that whenever a brick comes in, we are going to pray through that thing, we're going to fight through it, but we're going to toss it. Because if you don't, the default is a wall. And then I spent a bunch of time just apologizing to her about not listening. And also realizing there was treasure chest after treasure chest of wisdom that God was offering me through my wife that I squandered because I wouldn't listen. The simple act of shutting my mouth and just listening. And since then, we've done a bunch of things about learning how each other's personalities work, and it's a lot better. But I'm going to be doing this for the rest of my life, learning how to listen. But as far as me not being a heart of surrender and being willing to pay the price, no idea still. So for the next 3 weeks, I did what we all do when we don't know what's going on. We do self-fixing. Lord, it must be this. No, it must be this. And you start looking at all the things that you think you're screwing up, and that's why God's holding out on you, right? So there's this works mentality. And so I'm starting to think, what can I do to twist God's arm to make him be nice again? That's how you think. And you know what? All it did was get my stomach in a knot. You know that feeling when your stomach's in a knot, you don't have peace, you know nothing's going right, you know you're screwing up, and the Lord knows when to go out for a Coke or a cup of tea. Just let him be for a couple of weeks. Let him stew a bit. Let him think a bit. And 3 weeks later, again, I was awake at 1 o'clock in the morning, just worrying, just thinking what's going on. And I remember somebody had told me about a book that a minister by the name of Timothy Keller, he's the founding pastor of the Redeemer Presbyterian Church in New York City. He wrote a book, and the book's name is Counterfeit Gods. Has anybody heard of the book Counterfeit Gods? Counterfeit Gods? Okay, good. You don't have to check my notes. As I started reading this book, I felt God speak to me deep in my heart and say to me, this is the answer to the question you've been asking. How did you not pay the price, and how's your heart not surrendered? So Counterfeit Gods is a book about the idols that we chase, the things that we look to more than we look to God to give us value, meaning, identity, and worth in life. Okay? And oftentimes they're hidden. Now, if you say to people in modern times, what is an idol? Well, you'll talk about a little statue or a golden calf or something like that. But we make pop stars idols, right? So what can be an idol? Anything that's not God can be an idol. Anything that he has created. And in fact, the very best things in life, like purpose and passion, can become an idol in your life. Your job, money. Those aren't things that God doesn't want you to have. Those are good things, and you should have them. But when you want those things more than you want God, they become an idol. And the problem with idolatry is you become like what you worship. Take money. Take a 50 rand note. Does it have ears? No. Does it have a heart? No. Does it have compassion? No. You worship it, you become like it. happily charge a premium price for your product, pay a slave's wage for your employee, and then call it business acumen. No, it's ruthless business practice, something that God's kingdom is not happy with and will get kicked out. So how do you know that this might be something that's in your life? So one of the first questions he asks that I read was, is there anything that's more important to you than God? I very self-righteously said, nope. No. I love God. I've been loving him for a long time. The second question was, is there anything that absorbs your heart and imagination more than God? I'm like, no, bro. I listen to way much worship music, you know what I mean? And sermons and all kinds of, no. Next question was, is there anything you look to give you what only God can give you? And I thought to myself, well, I pray to him all the time for my needs. No. I misunderstood the question. The question was really, is there anything you look to give you an identity, worth, value, and refuge more than you look to God? So I very naively said no. But it was the next question that Keller asks in his book. Is there anything so central and essential to your life that should you lose it, your life would not feel like it's worth living anymore? Oops. And in that very moment, I looked back at that night when I was raging at God about all the things I'd lost in my life, and now my life doesn't feel like it's worth living anymore. And I'm looking at God, I'm saying, I don't have any evidence that you're in my life. Now God's looking at me, and he's saying, that's the evidence that I'm not in your life. And man, oh man, I started realizing my faith life needs a page one rewrite. I mean, I'd gone to Bible college. I'd read the Bible stuckant. I'd read so many books. And yet, at this point, I realized my faith life needs a page one rewrite. God reminded me of a bank that actually, I'll say this. The reason why I felt it needed a rewrite, because I started thinking to myself, my word, there's a large chunk of my motivation for being a Christian is me soliciting God to help me worship my idolatry. How many times did I not stand in church with my hands in the air, tears over my cheeks? Jesus, give me work so I can feel more valuable. Imagine my wife comes to me and she says to me, babe, I love you. I mean, you are the best thing that's ever happened. I praise you even. But I've met this guy, and I would love to use all of your money, networks, and time, and your friends to help me have an affair with him so that I can feel valuable. I says, girl. I mean, God dedicated an entire book in the Bible, Hosea, to this very subject. What does the wilderness do? It shows you your heart. God was busy showing me my heart. Trust me, it wasn't a pleasant experience. I mean, I had to admit, because, you know, I remembered, I felt him remind me of a story. It was about May 2010. I'd just gotten back from my dad that had cancer. And I just got back from that trip to South Africa, knowing that I was seeing him for the last time. So I was having a miserable day. It was my turn to go to the bank to get quarters so we could do the laundry. I remember standing in line, and this guy kept looking at me. And it's like he knows me. I'm like, dude, seriously, this is not a good day to do that. I get to the front. Of course, he's the only counter that opens. The other 4 people are busy. So I go to him, and he's so excited to see me. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm just going to do an American accent, because the minute you speak with a South African, they go, oh my gosh, that's a nice accent. Where are you from? I'm like, I don't want to tell you where I'm from. So I said to him, hey, can I have $20 worth of quarters, please? The guy's like, yeah, sure, man. So, hey, man, how was your weekend? Like, God has a way of outing you when you try and hide, right? So without thinking, I say to him, oh, we had some friends from South Africa. South Africa, I knew it. You the guy, man. I'm like, what guy? He's like, the potato guy, man. I'm like, faith like potatoes? Yeah, you the guy from the movie, dude. I can't, but what are you doing in Pasadena, man? And he's so excited, and I'm just steaming in my ears because I'm thinking, God, why are you reminding me of my past successes? My career's in the tank, and, you know, I'm miserable. So I'm trying to shut the conversation down. So I said to the guy, where did you see it? And he's like, we saw it at my church. We had this outreach, and people made right with God and got saved, and my pastor loved it so much, he's arranging another event. I can't believe you're in Pasadena, man. I'm like, thanks for the money, buddy. See you later. And as I'm walking out the bank, I remember thinking to myself, God, I want a job and I want money. My life's not worth living. And now I'm reading this book and I'm thinking, oh my word, Lord, I've just broken the two most important commandments in the Bible. I loved my career more than I loved the Lord my God. And I didn't love my neighbor as myself. I couldn't give a stuff about those people getting saved. My life wasn't happy. You know, good for Angus, did lots for his career, did stuff all for mine. I mean, let's be honest, right? You know, when God undresses us, He does it properly. I was a brat. If you're thinking that, you're 100% correct. You know, Jesus goes into the wilderness and He passes every test. I go into the wilderness, I pray for my rocks to turn to bread. They didn't, so I tried them anyways. Broke my teeth, got desperate. But take big risks, jump off big buildings. God's gracious and compassionate. So I didn't die, but I broke my legs. And then I got more desperate. And I was like, who the hell do I need to worship in here to get what I want? The difference between me and Jesus is staggering. He ushered in God's kingdom, died on a cross. And I'm a Christian. How could I be this blind? I mean, it's flipping nuts. I really, really needed a page one rewrite. Because you know what Jesus said? I mean, the Bible is always pointing forwards, and it's always pointing to Jesus, right? In Isaiah 43, I can't, just see if I can find it here real quick. There's this amazing scripture in Isaiah 43. It says this, Isaiah 43 verse 19, it says, behold, I'm doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness. Here's the problem. I don't care who you are, where you come from. If you go into the wilderness outside of Christ, you ain't going to make it. He made a way in the wilderness, and we need to follow Him in that. And without knowing it at the time, because remember, this is the other thing. I mean, I would love God to sometimes just, write it all down in an email and just send it to us and say, do this, 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 and this, and this. Love it when young people come to me and they send me, I just want to do God's will. I just want to know. And I'm like, you know what? Until your will and God's will clashes, I don't think you really know that you want to do His will. Because at the beginning of 2012, I thought this is the season of restoring my voice. And I thought, here we go. Acting roles are going to start rolling in. And you know what the Lord spoke to me about? He said to me, you came to take from this city. Let's just give it to you straight. I need you to serve this city. I'm like, great. Bring in the acting roles. He's like, no. I tried to find work eventually. A friend of mine advised me, said, dude, you need to put food on the table. You need to find work. I tried the inverted commas, their version, pick and pay, shelf packer, whatever. You know, the only door that opened for me, like you mentioned earlier, was to become a taxi driver, a cab driver. But God's a genius, because you know why? One of my idols, status. My dad was a doctor. We grew up wealthy. And yet it wasn't enough. It's one of the problems with idols. It's never enough. You make your beauty an idol, you never feel beautiful enough, and then you'll die 10,000 deaths by the time, when all the pluya come. Money will never be enough. It's never enough. It's a bottomless pit. So God puts me in a cab, and you know what? He's awesome, because I wore the same shoes, the same pants, and the same waistcoats I wore to the Toronto Film Festival, walking the red carpet. My face being splashed all over the world with big celebrities, me, everybody wants to know what I've got to say, 2,700 people giving us a standing ovation. The clothing I wore there, I wore the first day of cab driving, 2 days after my 40th birthday. How's it? Welcome. Like Tim Keller says, when God, it might feel like He's killing you when He's either threatening your idols or He's removing them. Another genius move of God was to put me in that cab. It's because I spent hours and hours, and I'm talking about hundreds and thousands of kilometers that you drive. 10 hours a day, between 10 and 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. And your social life goes out the window because you drive every Friday night from late in the afternoon to like 3, 4 in the morning. Same with Saturdays. Get up early for church and then go and do your stuff there. Because that's when you make the money, and then the rest of the time you just drive. You just drive. Always up at 4 o'clock in the morning because that's where consultants go to the airport. Tough going, but you know what? I had a lot of time in my hands. So God gave me the perfect opportunity to have a page 1 rewrite of my faith life. I started listening to a lot of Timothy Keller's sermons on Job and on Joseph because I needed guys who'd been through stuff to help me understand what I'm going through. I listened to N.T. Wright to straighten out some of my theology. I listened to Dr. Martin Lloyd-Jones. I listened to C.S. Lewis talking to people during the Second World War because I wanted to know what it was like when you lose your life. Those people lost their lives, and a lot of it wasn't their fault. And it was amazing because my mind was getting renewed. I mean, God took the time to pull me right out of my whole life, my career, took me out of my status and just put me in a cab and said, this is where we're going to be. And I had no idea how long it was going to last. I remember the beginning of 2013 was an interesting start. Beginning of 2013, I had a meeting with a friend of mine who I'm actually shooting a show for now in Cape Town, an American TV show. But at the time, he was producing a massive show that went big, and you'll know if I had to mention it. But I auditioned for him for 4 different roles. And he was like, dude, over my dead body, you're not getting to the show. 100%. So I meet with him at the Starbucks in Brentwood, and he sits me down and says, dude, it's such bad news. He said, we watched your tapes. You did a great job. There's nothing wrong with you. Unfortunately, you're too good looking for the roles. And you have too much of a leading man presence for the other one. I said, what? Too pretty in Hollywood? What the heck? But you know what the Lord was saying? Years later, as I was writing my book, he was saying, this thing here used to get you work. You trusted this thing more than anything else, more than me. And I just needed to show you that they can also block you from getting work. Because when the man in charge says yes, it's yes. If he says no, it's no. And ain't nothing going to change anything about that. Because the next day I wrote my agents, and I had the biggest agents in the world. WME, William Morris Endeavor. If you look them up, you see their clients, Ben Affleck, Matt Damon, Spielberg, the list is Scorsese. And I was one of their clients. You don't phone them, they phone you. It's a huge agent. I mean, that is like a breakthrough in and of itself. Auditioned for Superman, got a call back. I thought, wow, this is it. Right? So I write them and say, hey, it's pilot season. I'm ready to go. I've been busting my butt driving a cab, still going to acting classes, doing my thing. And the next I get an email back from them, sorry, we can't send you out because we no longer represent you as of last year. Sorry if it's a surprise. I knew what networking was intellectually, but until you feel that sting that you're only worth $sign to someone, you don't know how much it hurts. 2 days later, 5:30 in the morning, or 3 days later, 5:30 in the morning, I'm sitting in my cab waiting for a client. She's late. So I check my emails. It's from a producer from South Africa who had approached me and offered me a role in a movie. And I got the email. I hadn't spoken to them for about 6 months, and it's been back and forth and auditioning and all kinds of stuff, talking to the director. And I mean, I'm like, yes, finally, I'm going to get out of this. What? And I still have the email on my phone. It's with reluctant consensus that we came to the conclusion that you're too good looking for the role. And we've cut you from the movie. I've never had that happen before that, and I've never had that happen since. I think God was just making a simple point. About 3 weeks later, I get a call from the cab company. They say, you need to come to the dispatch center. They said to me, listen, but, well, they didn't say but, it probably was bro. They would have said bro. The cab company's shutting down because we lost our insurance. There were too many guys that had accidents, and we've lost our insurance. It's like a mafia basically runs the insurance in LA for cabs. So you've lost your job. I mean, I rode my bicycle home because at that point I was on the company bike, and the company bicycle. And I remember thinking to myself, yes, but it was humiliating enough getting a cab job. I'm flipping losing one. No, come on, man. My wife phones me like a little while after that. We're doing our tax return. She says, babe, my employer employed me in the wrong category as a 1099, which is a contract instead of an employee. We owe the IRS an entire year's worth of Social Security taxes. It was paying off a small BMW for 20 months. Then my bank from South Africa phones up, and they say, listen, you've been out of the country for too long. At that point, it was 17 years or something. I was their client, and they said, we shut all your accounts, all your overdrafts, credit cards. I've never missed a payment. They said, but it's all due now. Legal proceedings have already started. If you don't want a surprise at Rautenbach, best you pay. That was the first 4 months of 2013. But I knew differently this time. Either God's threatening your idols, and that feels horrible, or He's removing them, and that feels horrible. But the one part you have a little bit more understanding and peace, and the other part you just don't know what the heck's happening. So I went to a trusted friend to, get consoled. I walked into his office and I said, listen, just pray for me, but my arms are hanging, man. I don't know what's happening here. And instead of praying for me, he proceeded to give me the Jim Collins hedgehog thing and basically explained to me, you need to find your sweet spot in life. And I'm sitting there, I'm like, just pray for me, please. This is how it works. You need to find your passion, the thing that drives you economically, and it gives me this whole thing, and basically your strategy is wrong. That's why you're in this position. It's what Job calls a miserable comforter, someone who gives you simplistic answers to the complexities of life, especially when it comes to suffering. God wasn't trying to help me find my sweet spot. He knew I had already found my sweet spot. He had removed that from my life, and he was busy transforming me. I just didn't know it at the time. And I just needed my friend to maybe cry with me or pray for me. So put that in your hat and remember it next time someone comes to you and they're just hurting. Sat in my car afterwards and I was miserable, and I looked at God and I was like, I don't want it broken. And I remembered how that little saying came into our lives many years ago. We were in New Zealand. How am I doing for time? Am I still good? Okay. Many years ago, we were in New Zealand, and we were having dinner with our friends Andrew and Anna in 2002, I remember. And we're sitting at the table. Anna literally had made organic corn soup from scratch. I think they even grew the corn. I mean, it's one of those meals. And she'd made these freshly baked, own-made, from-scratch buns. And it was amazing. She brought the meal out, put it on the table, and she put these buns in front of all of us. And then she put some butter on the bun in front of her 3-year-old. And as she put the butter on, the bun was so fresh it broke open. And the 3-year-old gave it a look, and she went, I don't want it broken. And I was like, Piata, you can eat it. It's fine. Just eat it. And it broken. It goes from 0 to like hurricane mode in 3 seconds. I don't want it broken. Eventually, Anna says to her, look, can you please stop? Can you get off from the table? Go to your room. And looking at us adults, idiots, we can't understand how this works. And eventually she gets to her room, but now she can still check us sitting at the dinner table, and she's in the frame of the door because she's now in her room. I don't want it broken! Screaming her head off, and Anna's like, we'd like to say grace, close the door. And when you're done, you can come back. Of course, she wasn't done. Through the keyhole. She wouldn't let go. And as I'm sitting there, I thought to myself, oh, Lord Jesus, help me, because my prayers are like that 3-year-old. I'm just screaming at you. I don't want it broken. See, the problem is with Piata is that she couldn't understand the form that the blessing came in. The bread broke precisely because it was good. But because it came in a form that wasn't acceptable to her, she couldn't take it. Jesus, bread of life, broken for us, often comes into our lives in a form that isn't acceptable. And we sit in our rooms and we scream, I don't want it broken. And we don't engage him. So I got another cab job. It was my bread to eat. And I worked that cab job. In total, it was almost 3 years. And at the end of 2014, I'd met someone in my cab, actually, a South African that lives in Australia. I can't go into details because I'm running out of time. But he had arranged for me, Anton Becker is his name, he arranged for me to go and speak on behalf of World Vision and Compassion in Australia and New Zealand. We did a massive tour, about 50 different places. And I was able to share my story, and it went down amazingly well. And it was an incredible time of ministry. And when I got home, I realized God had given me a voice. And it happened between 2012 and 2014 in the last place on earth I thought it would happen, in a cab driving through the streets of Los Angeles. I mean, isn't he amazing? So the next year, I thought to myself, this is it. I've got a voice. Let's go. You know, the only door that opened for me is to become a janitor at my church. 22 toilets. Trust me, I know them intimately. I can't believe what people do in toilets. But I cleaned them, washed floors. And I remember what it was. My wife came to me and she said, the janitor's just resigned. It's open for you, and it includes health insurance, which is, by the way, super expensive. $1,000 a month. And all you get is like medical cover, and you got to co-pay still for the doctor. You got to, especially still got to pay $300 after you've paid $1,000 per month. And it doesn't include dental, optometry. It's a nightmare. So anyway, so she said to me, I think you should take the job. I thank God that I listened to her at that time because it was wisdom. And I took the job, but I promise you my heart broke when I took that job. Because it's the opposite end of my personality. I'm an adventurer. I'm not a maintainer. I'm not a maintenance guy. And I had no idea why God would take precious years of my working life and flip and put me in a janitorial job. But there I was, little black gloves on a Sunday, cleaning aisles. All these hipsters from LA walking into church. There I am. Can I have your cup? Thank you. And that's what I did for almost 2 years. And then I remember one night, it was like I was in the death zone of Everest. I was running out of oxygen. And a mate of mine, Ben, who's an executive pastor at a big church in Las Vegas and also works with Hillsong. And he said to me, mate, I think the Lord's kicking you out the nest. Sometimes he makes circumstances uncomfortable, and he'll kick you out the nest. So I went home that night, lay in my bed. I remember it was midnight, closed my eyes, and I went, help. And then I fell asleep. And I'll never forget it, 6 minutes past 3 a.m., 3rd of August, 2016. I woke up, and there was just this beautiful, peaceful presence of God around me. And I felt him tell me to read my quiet time for the day, which is from a book that I read called The Songs of Jesus. It's a book based only on the Psalms, written by Tim and Kathy Keller. And his premise for writing the book was, if Jesus knew the Psalms backwards, what's your excuse for not knowing them? So I started doing that. That particular day, the psalm was Psalm 88. It's probably the darkest psalm in the Bible. It starts with things like, how can I speak of your faithfulness and praise you when I'm crushed in the grave, and blah, 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 and it carries on. I mean, this guy had a miserable life, and as he carries on, and then at the end it says, you've taken from me my family, and you've taken from me my friends, and now the only thing that's my friend is darkness. Darkness is my only friend. And that's where it ends. And then Keller writes, and he says, why would God leave that psalm in the Bible? It's, it just ends on a dark note without any hope. And he says simply this, is that the Lord understands that sometimes times of spiritual darkness can last a long time. And spiritual darkness, you don't know what's around you. You have no answers. You're just walking because you're just walking. Don't leave your despair at the door. Be honest about your despair with God. And also know that your prayers, the third point he makes is know that your prayers are way more effective than they possibly will feel in times like that. So don't stop praying. Don't not engage your community, your church, your community groups, your friends. And finally he says, here we see a man in Job 1 verse 9 who's willing to serve God for nothing. And at that moment, Satan's accusation becomes untrue. And as I read that, I felt God speak to me and say, this is what the last 5 years have been about. You came to me and accused me of not having evidence that it was in your life, and you made Satan's accusation true because you were only in it for the stuff and not for me. But with all my heart, I thank God because Jesus stood up and said, I'm his advocate. I'm going to defend him in this court. I've made a way in the wilderness. I can set him free. Philippians 2 is the Everest of theology of what Jesus did. He put aside all of his status. He came, put on the body of a human, became a servant, then died the most humiliating death that you can die. And God exalted him. And then Paul says in verse 12 of Philippians 2, therefore, in other words, look at that. Therefore, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. And that's when I realized that not on my best day can I live up to that kind of status of he loved me and he gave himself up for me. But I knew that Jesus kept me going, driving that cab, working as a janitor. He walked me through it. And then God looked at me and he said, you're free to go. You're willing to serve me for nothing. This meant nothing to your career, meant nothing for nothing. You just served me. You listened and you served. You're free to go, man. And the next day I went and I resigned my job. And about 3 months later, I was working at a production company in LA. And about 10 months ago, we moved back to South Africa. And we've got some dreams, we've got some plans, but we'll hold them lightly. Thank you so much for listening. Bless you guys.